The first thing that made me pay attention was how precisely my wife started being late. Not late in the ordinary way people are late when life gets crowded. Not traffic, not a forgotten errand, not one of those breathless apologies with grocery bags cutting into your fingers. This was cleaner than that. Repeating, measured, she would leave at 5:10 and come back at 7:32. 5:12 and 7:36. 5:08 and 7:30. Always with a reason that sounded normal because she had a gift for normal. I noticed because I work with patterns for a living. Before I tell you how this marriage really fell apart, subscribe to Reddit Ride. It's one of the best ways to help the channel grow and keep these betrayal, quiet revenge, and hard-ending stories coming. My name is Eli Mercer. I'm a marine biologist at a coastal research institute on the Gulf, and for most of my adult life, I have made a living out of noticing what changes when everything else pretends to stay the same. Water temperature half a degree warmer than it should be. Salinity off after a storm. Migration routes shifting before the headlines catch up. People think science is made of breakthroughs. Mostly it's made of quiet attention. My wife Nora was the opposite of quiet attention. She was warmth, easy laughter, the kind of woman who remembered names, birthdays, allergies, and who was feuding with whom without ever seeming to keep score. We lived in a small Florida town where everybody knew your truck and your business by sight, and Nora moved through it like she'd been born with a hand on every shoulder. She ran a gift shop near the square, helped with festival planning, volunteered for 2 committees nobody really understood, and had the kind of face people trusted before she even opened her mouth. For 11 years, that charm had felt like a blessing. We were busy, but busy in the respectable way married people are busy when they think that means they're safe. My days started early at the institute or out on the water. Hers stretched around inventory, vendors, churchwomen, chamber lunches, and community events. We still ate dinner together most nights. Still kissed in the kitchen. Still knew each other's coffee orders, doctor appointments, favorite sides at the seafood place on Highway 1. Nothing about us looked broken. That's what made the new timing feel wrong. It started in September, after hurricane season had threatened us without quite touching us. Nora began mentioning committee work more often. A planning subcommittee, a donor outreach call, a late vendor meeting, things that sounded too boring to interrogate. I never interrogated them. I just started noticing that she came home with fresh lipstick and tired eyes that didn't match. Or that she said she'd been helping at the shop, but the paper band from the bakery downtown was in the console from the other direction. Or that she'd claimed she had spent 2 hours setting up centerpieces, and her hands were too clean for cut stems or wire. Individually, none of it was anything. Together, it felt like a tide pulling wrong. I didn't accuse her. That's the part people get wrong when they ask me later how I found out. They imagine some dramatic instinct. Some scene. There wasn't one. There was just the slow discomfort of being married long enough to know when a person has started performing the version of herself that works best on strangers. She became more affectionate, which was the cruelest part. If I came in from the institute smelling like boat fuel and salt, she'd step into my chest and say she missed me. If I was looking at field notes over dinner, she'd touch the back of my neck the way she did when we were younger. She asked better questions, laughed faster. There was an extra softness to her that would have reassured anyone who didn't live inside the rhythms of her face. Charm, I learned, is often just panic in good lighting. The first hard thing I found was in our laundry room. Not because I was searching. Our dryer had been making a scraping sound for days, and on a Saturday morning I pulled it forward to see if one of the vent clamps had come loose. Nora had left a canvas tote on top of the machine, one of the plain cream ones stores hand out at conferences and local events. When I moved it, it tipped. Pens, a folded event flyer, lip balm, and a narrow paper sleeve slid onto the tile. It was a hotel key card sleeve. White, thick paper, a little gold logo on the front. The Harbor View Suites in Bayport. Bayport was 45 minutes south. Too far for accidental coffee. Too near for innocence. I stood there looking at it for a long time. Not because a hotel key card sleeve proves an affair. It doesn't. People attend meetings. Vendors book rooms. Committees plan retreats no one remembers to mention. A single object can be explained by a single sentence. What made my stomach turn was the handwriting on the back. 614. West Elevator, not a room assignment printed by the hotel. Blue ink, written by hand. I put everything back exactly where I found it except the sleeve. That I photographed on the dryer lid, then put in my desk drawer at the institute under old permits and calibration logs. Like if I hid it among scientific paperwork, it might become less personal. For 3 days, I said nothing. On the 4th day, she came home at 7:34 and set a bag of takeout on the counter from a restaurant in Bayport she claimed never to visit because the place smells like old fryer oil. When I asked lightly how committee planning had gone, she smiled without missing a beat and said, "Long. Janet can't make a decision to save her life." Then she walked over and kissed me like the lie had cost her nothing. After that, I started seeing the layering. That was the real betrayal. Not even the sex, though I knew by then there was probably sex. It was the architecture. The way she had built cover under cover. She used real names attached to fake tasks. Real events wrapped around false timing. She borrowed credibility from ordinary life, the way people borrow sugar from neighbors and never return the cup. At home, truth began surfacing in small physical pieces. A valet stub from a hotel garage tucked inside a cookbook she had not opened in years. A cocktail napkin with a phone number on it, torn in half, shoved into the side pocket of her weekender bag. A dry cleaning ticket from Bayport in the pocket of a cardigan she said she wore to lunch with her mother. A second key card sleeve from the same hotel, buried in the bottom of a cosmetics pouch beneath travel tissues and mints. No lipstick on collars, no dramatic messages lighting up a screen. Just the stubborn evidence of a hidden life getting sloppy at the edges inside my own house. If I had been a different kind of man, maybe I would have gone through her phone, put a tracker on her car, turned myself into the kind of husband who starts talking about burner accounts and spyware, and all the dark little tools that make people feel powerful while they're still being lied to. I didn't need to. Nora was giving herself away in paper and cardboard. And I think a part of me needed it to be physical. Something I could hold. Something with corners. The day it became undeniable, I found the envelope. It was in the hall closet behind an extra beach towel, the sort of place you put something when you only need it hidden long enough to get it out of the house later. Plain cream stationery. No stamp. Folded once. Inside was a brochure for our institute's annual donor reception, Discovery Night, which was scheduled for the following Friday. Nora loved Discovery Night. She liked getting dressed up and being seen as the supportive wife of a scientist, the pleasant woman who could speak warmly about coral restoration for 6 minutes and then pivot to asking somebody's wife where she found her shoes. On the back of the brochure in the same blue ink as the hotel sleeve, someone had written, after Eli's remarks slip out, "I'll be downstairs." Below that was a first name. Gavin. I knew Gavin. Not well, but enough. Gavin Holt managed vendor relationships for one of the regional marine supply companies that sponsored our field equipment. He came through the institute a few times a year with brochures, budgets, polished shoes, and a smile that always landed just a fraction too long on the person he was speaking to. Mid-40s, tan that belonged to someone who spent more time maintaining it than earning it. Wedding band, at least last I noticed. I sat on the edge of our bed with that brochure in my hand and felt my body go hollow. People say heartbreak feels sharp. Mine didn't. It felt drained, like somebody had opened a valve in my chest and let the pressure out until I was only structure. I remember hearing the dishwasher run in the kitchen and thinking how obscene it was that machines kept doing their jobs when a life had just split open. That night, while Nora slept beside me with her back warm against the sheet, I got up and went outside. Our house backed onto a little patch of marsh that glowed silver when the moon was decent. I sat on the back steps until 2 in the morning and let myself have exactly 1 hour of private collapse. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes. I asked questions no one was there to answer. I felt the humiliating, animal ache of being made a fool of by the person who knew where I kept my heart. Then I stood up, washed my face in the laundry sink, and began to prepare. Preparation saved me. Not because it made me hard, because it made me functional. The next week, I didn't search for more than what she was already careless enough to leave behind. I simply collected what existed. I photographed the keycard sleeves, the valet stub, the Bayport takeout receipt she never knew had fallen between the seats of her car, the dry cleaning ticket, the brochure with Gavin's note. I wrote down dates and times. I matched them to dinners she had missed, committee meetings she said ran long, church volunteer nights that somehow ended with her coming home showered and distant. When you lay enough ordinary lies beside each other, they start to look like engineering. I also called a lawyer in Panama City, whose name a colleague had once given me after his own marriage fell apart. I met her on a Wednesday afternoon and brought a manila folder that made me feel older than I was. She did not act shocked. That helped. She asked practical questions. House title, joint accounts, business interests, insurance, children. We didn't have children. I used to think that was one grief in my life. Sitting in that office, I understood it was also one mercy. She told me not to make threats I couldn't carry out and not to confuse pain with strategy. She told me documentation mattered, but so did restraint. She told me small towns feed on spectacle, and if I wanted peace later, I should decide early whether my goal was punishment or separation. My goal, I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded, is that she never gets to use me as the soft place she lands after this blows back. The lawyer nodded once. That, she said, is a useful goal. At home, Nora kept performing. One night she made shrimp pasta and asked whether I thought the sea turtle rehab video might be too depressing for donors. Another night she curled against me on the couch and laughed at a show I wasn't watching. Once, standing at the bathroom sink, she caught my eyes in the mirror and smiled with that old small-town sweetness and said, "You've been quiet lately." "You okay, baby?" It was the baby that almost undid me. I looked at her and saw, for one raw second, every year I had loved her faithfully. The first apartment with cheap blinds. The borrowed truck on moving day. The Sundays we spent painting kitchen cabinets in our first house. Her feet in my lap after long Christmas seasons at the shop. The version of us I had believed in so completely, I had never thought to defend it. Then the moment passed. I'm fine, I said. She relaxed. That was when I knew her blind spot was fatal. She believed charm could still manage me. Discovery night arrived clear and mild, the sort of Florida evening tourists mistake for the whole state. The Institute grounds were lit with strings of soft bulbs between the live oaks, and the air smelled like salt, sunscreen, and catering fuel. Sponsors drifted through the exhibits with white wine and careful enthusiasm. Board members wore linen and importance. A jazz trio near the touch tank was playing something tasteful enough for rich people to ignore. Nora arrived in a deep green dress I had never seen before. That detail landed harder than it should have. There is something especially cruel about realizing your wife has been dressing for another life in colors you never knew she owned. She kissed my cheek in front of 2 donors from Tampa and told me I looked handsome. Gavin Holt was across the courtyard near the sponsor wall, laughing at something our development director said. He glanced our way once, just briefly, then away again with the smooth indifference of a man who thinks he understands risk. I gave my remarks at 7:30. Coral bleaching, community partnerships, student research, the future of coastal restoration if people with money decided to care about it for reasons beyond branding. I have spoken publicly for years, and that night my voice was the calmest it had ever been because none of what came out of my mouth had anything to do with the real event of the evening. When I finished, applause rose and died. Nora was standing near the back, smiling at me with the face she used for photographs. I stepped down from the platform and walked directly to her. "Can you come with me for a minute?" I asked. Her smile held. Now yes, the tone must have reached her before the words did. Not enough to alarm anyone else. Enough for her. I led her past the side corridor near the specimen prep room, away from the donors and string lights and polished glasses. There was a narrow office there we used for vendor paperwork and event storage. I had already placed a folder on the desk. When she saw it, something flickered in her eyes. Not guilt, recognition. That's another thing people misunderstand. By the time truth is confronted, the guilty often know exactly which truth has arrived. "Eli," she said softly, still trying for warmth, "what is this?" I closed the door, but not all the way. I had no interest in being trapped in a sealed room with a woman who had been lying to me for months. The hallway hum of the event remained just outside us, like another life continuing. I opened the folder and laid out the first hotel sleeve. Then the second. Then the valet stub. The dry cleaning ticket. The brochure with Gavin's note. I placed them in a row with the care of a man arranging slides for a lecture. Nora looked at them, then at me. "Okay," she said after a few seconds. "This looks bad." I said nothing. She stepped closer, lowering her voice into the intimate register she used when she wanted me to feel like we were on the same side of something. "It isn't what you think." There are sentences so common they become insulting by existing. I slid a sheet of paper toward her. On it were the dates of each object and the explanations she had given me for each one. Committee meeting, vendor delay, George call, inventory run, Janet can't decide, helping a friend, stayed late at the shop. Beside each entry I had written the corresponding evidence. "Then tell me what it is," I said. She looked down. "Back up." Tried a sad smile. "Gavin and I raised my hand once, not aggressively. Just enough." "No," her eyes sharpened. "No," she repeated. "No editing. No pilot episode of the version where I don't understand what I'm looking at." For the first time that night she stopped acting. Something went hard in her face. Not cruel exactly. More like tired. "It started as meetings," she said. "I was lonely, Eli." I almost laughed at the professionalism of it. The way she delivered even confession like a prepared statement. "You were lonely," I repeated. "Yes, in our house. In the marriage where I kept showing up. While you built a second schedule and taught yourself to lie in layers." She blinked and tears rose immediately. Impressive tears. Vast tears. Nora had always been able to cry at the exact speed a moment required. "I didn't mean for it to become a full affair," I asked. "Because that's what it became." She looked away. That was answer enough. Outside in the corridor, I heard a burst of laughter from the reception floor. Glasses clinked. The jazz trio drifted through a standard I couldn't name. The world remained offensively elegant. Nora took a breath and reached for my wrist. "I love you." I looked at her hand on me and felt nothing but exhaustion. "That's the sentence you kept," I said quietly. "That's the one you thought would still work." She pulled her hand back as if I had burned her. "You don't know everything," she said, and there it was at last, the edge, the small offended pride underneath all that southern softness. "You don't know what it's been like being married to a man who's always half in his head, half on the water. You don't know what it's like to smile for everyone while you disappear at home." That one landed, because unfair things can still be true in fragments. I nodded once. "Then you should have left honestly." Her mouth tightened. "This wasn't about leaving." "No," I said. "It was about keeping." That made her flinch. "Keeping me for respectability. Keeping him for appetite. Keeping the marriage for appearance. Keeping the town's good opinion. Keeping access to a life that required my steadiness while she spent parts of herself elsewhere." That was the structure, and once I could see it, I couldn't unsee it. I took one more paper from the folder and set it down. It was a typed letter from my lawyer asking that all further discussion about property division and living arrangements go through counsel. Basic, clean, nothing dramatic. Nora stared at it, and for the first time, fear looked real on her. You went to a lawyer, yes, you planned this. I almost admired the instinct it took to accuse the betrayed of planning. I prepared for the truth after you prepared to survive it, I said. Her face drained. Eli, the guest room locks have been changed. She looked at me like she hadn't heard correctly. Your sister knows you'll be calling her tonight. Your personal things are already boxed in the storage room at the shop. Not everything, just what you need immediately. The rest can be handled later through attorneys. Her lips parted. Closed. You packed my things. I removed you from the part of my life you don't get to walk back into. She shook her head slowly, like reality might still be charmed into another arrangement. You can't do this tonight. I already did. The hallway beyond the door shifted. Someone passed by. Neither of us moved. Nora tried one last time, and it was the saddest version of her I have ever seen because it was still, even now, an act built around a real fear. We can fix this, she whispered. I looked at the evidence lined across the desk. Cardboard, paper, ink, ordinary objects that had carried an extraordinary amount of rot into my house. No, I said. You can survive this. That's different, she started crying harder then. Real or maybe. I don't know. At that point, I no longer cared enough to sort authentic pain from strategic pain. Both belonged to her. I gathered the papers back into the folder, except for the letter from the lawyer. That one is yours, she didn't pick it up. I opened the door and stepped aside. She looked at me as if she expected a final explosion, some dramatic sentence she could use later when she retold the end of her marriage in a flattering way. I didn't give her one. I just held the door. After a long moment, she took the letter and walked out. Gavin was nowhere in the corridor. Maybe he had seen enough from across the event to understand that whatever arrangement he'd been enjoying had just acquired legal vocabulary and social risk. Maybe he was already back near the bar pretending to care about wetland grants. Maybe he had left. I didn't go looking. I returned to the reception floor, thanked 3 donors, spoke to a board member about next quarter's vessel maintenance budget, and stood through the rest of the evening with a glass of sparkling water in my hand and a stillness inside me so complete it felt almost holy. When people asked where Nora was, I said she wasn't feeling well and had gone home. That was the only protection I offered her, and it was the last. The weeks after were quieter than I expected. Not easy. Quiet. Small towns love scandal, but they love vague scandal most of all because it lets everybody season the facts to taste. Nora stayed with her sister for a while, then rented a place outside town. Gavin's marriage apparently did not survive the month, which I learned not because I asked, but because news travels fastest through people who call gossip prayer requests. Nora texted me several times at first. Long apologies, short apologies, memory-laced apologies, angry apologies. A message that began, "You weren't blameless in this," which I left unread after the first line. I responded only through my attorney. That was the exile. Not revenge. Not humiliation. Just removal. She no longer got my listening. She no longer got access to my private softness, my routine, my forgiveness, my kitchen, my exhaustion, my field stories, my Sunday mornings, my decent opinion of her. She had spent months creating a separate life, and then seemed stunned to discover I could make that separation permanent. Winter on the Gulf is not dramatic, but it has its own kind of cleansing. The air sharpened. Tourist traffic thinned. The marsh behind the house turned bronze at the edges. I started staying late at the Institute again, not to avoid home, but because work became honest company. Corals bleach or recover. Water warms or cools. Turtles heal or they don't. The natural world can be brutal, but at least it does not flatter you while it's changing shape. I cooked for one and learned it wasn't the tragedy people make it out to be. I changed the bedroom curtains she had always promised we'd replace together. I threw out cracked mugs we kept because they were wedding gifts from people we hadn't spoken to in 8 years. I started running again at dawn along the shoreline road east of town, where the air tastes like salt and pennies before sunrise. Once in February, I passed Nora's shop and saw her through the window arranging a display of spring candles with the same practiced pleasantness she used to wear into our house after lying to my face. For a second, the old instinct rose in me, the instinct to look for the woman I married inside the woman who betrayed me. Then it passed. She was not hidden in there waiting to be recovered. She was the one who had made those choices. Both things could be true, that I had loved her deeply, and that the version of her I loved no longer existed by the time I understood what our life had become. The divorce moved forward the way all bureaucratic grief moves forward. Signatures, disclosures, dates, a conference call, inventory, silence. Because we had no children and because I had been careful early, it ended with less blood than it might have. Some people in town kept their distance from me for a while, as if betrayal were contagious or dignity somehow impolite. Others became unexpectedly kind. One of the graduate students at the Institute told me, months later over coffee, that I seemed calmer than before. I almost corrected her. I wasn't calmer. I was clearer. There's a difference. Calm can be temporary. A held breath. A social skill. Clarity is structural. Once it arrives, certain doors stop existing. By spring, I had rebuilt my life into something leaner and more solid. Not happier in the cartoon sense. Truer. The house felt like mine again. I bought a used skiff from a retired charter captain and started taking it out alone on Sunday mornings, cutting through the flat silver water before the bay woke up. Sometimes I brought a notebook and wrote nothing. Sometimes I just listened to the hull move through current and let that be enough. People love redemption stories because they expect a replacement at the end. A better woman, a grand lesson, some polished line about fate clearing the way. That wasn't my experience. What I got was self-respect without witnesses. A life I no longer had to split open to keep someone else comfortable. The freedom of not confusing loyalty with passivity ever again. And the knowledge that the real damage in a betrayal is not always the affair itself. Sometimes it's the months you spend being carefully managed by someone who has mistaken your steadiness for blindness. Sometimes the deepest wound is realizing how many ordinary objects can carry deceit into a home without making a sound. A paper sleeve, a valet stub, a brochure folded once and hidden behind a towel. Truth rarely arrives with thunder. In my life, it came in cardboard and ink. The last time Nor tried to speak to me directly was outside the courthouse after we finalized everything. Not a dramatic courthouse, just a county building with bad fluorescent light and a flag that snapped in the heat. She stepped toward me in a pale blue blouse, and that same expression people wear when they are only now understanding the exact price of what they traded away. "Eli," she said. I stopped because politeness is hard to kill. She looked tired, older around the mouth, still beautiful in the familiar way that no longer meant anything to me. "I did love you," she said. There was a time when that sentence could have opened my chest. By then, it only confirmed how poorly she understood the difference between feeling and character. I nodded once, not to comfort her but to acknowledge the noise. Then I walked to my truck, put the key in the ignition, and drove back toward the water. By then, she was only someone who used to have a key. If this story pulled you in, like, subscribe, and leave a comment. That support helps Reddit Ride grow and helps me keep bringing you more stories where the lies are quiet and the consequences hit hard.